Thank you so much for staying with us. And in case you're just joining us, this is Daybreak. And you're just in time for a very important conversation that is just about to start now as we dissect what was discussed in Nairobi and the Nairobi Declaration, and a lot that experts discussed and agreed on the way forward on how the continent ought to be addressing the climate change crisis. It is said that we bear the biggest brunt, but the polluters are elsewhere. So what is it that we should be doing to be able to better serve our interest as a continent? And I have with me in studio Engineer Festus Ngeno, who is the Principal Secretary from the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. Once again, thank you for creating time. We have also with us Dean Bebe. He's an activist. Thank you, Bebe, for creating time. And also with us, Peter Odhengo, the Head of Climate Finance and Green Economy Unit, Project Coordinator at Fluka, for Fluka. Of course, we will be also talking about this very important initiative and a milestone that I would say was achieved in this particular Africa Climate Change Summit. In this conversation, I told you we're expecting Elizabeth Wathuti, the lead coordinator, Africa Youth Climate Assembly, who should be joining us for this conversation as well. And you also engage with us on social media at Safin_Chieng. The hashtag is Daybreak at Citizen TV Kenya, our official Twitter handle, the SMS platform 22422. Share with us your thoughts as well. And I'll start with you, Engineer Festus Ngeno, the PS. Earlier I just asked you off air whether you were happy, and I'd like you to talk to us now and tell us, are you happy with the outcome? 3 days just having this very important conversation. Do you think, we utilize this opportunity? We were being told, seize the moment. Did we seize this moment from your perspective?
Yes, thank you so much, Sophie. From where I sit, the African nation is happy, Kenya is happy, and I am happy as a person who was part of the process of putting together the Africa Climate Summit and the Africa Climate Week. On the onset, I would like to thank His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, who is the Chair of Committee of Heads of States of Governments on Climate Change, CAHOS, at the Africa Union, for agreeing to host this summit with the Africa Union. I think that gave us a platform for us to be able to showcase what we needed to do, putting a united front, a united voice. And one of the key things that makes us proud as a government, as Africa, as a nation, is the fact that we were able to achieve the unified voice on the Nairobi Declaration on climate action and climate change and climate finance. I think that is one of the critical aspects that we were looking forward to as outcomes, and we did achieve that. And from where I sit, I'm very happy.
All right, it's good that we have you so that you can tell us more about what makes you happy.
Thank you.
And I just want to also hear your thoughts, Bebe, from the outcome of the summit. What is your analysis of what we achieved as a continent?
Thank you very much. I think the summit as a whole was a success in the sense that, Africa finally got to convene a space, essentially, to address the climate emergency. But the big problem then comes as to how we conducted this, the process to which we got to the point where we're actually convening this space. I think the most thing that apparent coming out of the summit is essentially a missed opportunity. Thinking around the abundant resources Africa has that are grounded on renewable energy, and that potential was not acknowledged and tapped into. I think despite the fact that there was an acknowledgement around renewable energy ambition targets as a continent, there was still a strong push to come out of African leaders calling for an increased investment into renewable energy and to phase out, not phase down, fossil fuel projects across the continent. So I believe there are just mixed feelings. I think a space was convened, which was great. But I guess there are also underlying issues that, as you mentioned earlier on, we bear, the consequences of the climate crisis, yet we're the very least responsible for it. But how we then holistically and mindfully addressing that approach was very significant, and I did not see that coming out of the summit.
Peter, do you think Africa is taking anything home after this summit?
Yes, Africa is taking something home, but not 100%, because Africa's priority is adaptation. Africa is living in a warmer earth. Africa needs resilience. But that commitment that Africa as a continent came together and speak in one voice and pronounce themselves from the head of states to the technocrats that Africa is warming, Africa needs support, and the African priority is adaptation and building the resilience. But over and above, those ones require money, funds, climate finance. That is what Africa would want to hear. We have talked, we have danced, but we are still having vagaries of climate change. We need to adapt. We need to build the local resilience at the lowest level possible. But that one cannot be measured today. The summit ended yesterday. Another one is going on today. We will be analyzing it before heading to COP27. But my grandmother, our children are happy that something happened in Nairobi, Kenya, and brought in Africa together. Ever since, we have never spoken with that audacity, authenticity, or purpose, and we hope it will be sustained.
All right, and I like the fact that you brought in the local people into this conversation and that they are happy that something happened in Nairobi. And I hope that that something is something that they can understand, that this climate change agenda someday will be told in a way that they can be able to consume and understand, because they only suffer the consequences and the impact, but they don't understand the nitty-gritties of what is going on. And I think we should move into that space of now trying to help the communities and the villagers down there to be able to understand what is happening in our world right now and their role in providing solutions to the challenges that we are facing. But then there was something that sort of I would say was the icing of the cake at the tail end of the summit. That was the Nairobi Declaration. And I know this is the season where people are still interacting with it and understanding the nitty-gritties and how it should be broken down and implemented practically. But in PS, just to look at, that declaration and its significance, and, even as we, go towards COP28, why should we be concerned about, why is it such a big deal from somebody probably who may still be interacting with it? Why is it important?
Thank you so much. Climate change is an existential threat to humanity, as my colleagues have put it. Yes, it is true. In Africa, we are the least polluters, but we also suffer most because of other people who pollute the environment. So one of the key things that the summit prescribed for us was, and this is a call by the African Union and also by the chair of the CAHOS, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, was one of that we want Africa to provide solutions. We want Africa to provide opportunities. If you look at the theme of the summit, it was about driving green growth and opportunities and for climate solutions and finance. And one of the key things that we were looking at is 4 thematic areas. The renewable energy, as my colleague has mentioned. We are looking at the critical green minerals. We are looking at the carbon sinks and the abundance of it, and of course the arable land that is available for Africa for food security. So the Nairobi Declaration was one of its kind. This is the first time that over 20 heads of states attended the summit. We had over 24,000 delegates who participated in the summit. And getting a united voice before we go to COP28 was one of the greatest achievements. We've never done this before. As indicated earlier, the Nairobi Declaration was, we were forging a common united voice so that when it comes to the issues, we want to be at the table. We don't want to be, again, at the issues of lamenting the global south versus the global north. And that becomes a very, we can't be able to move forward. Quite a number of promises, as my colleague had mentioned, have been promised in terms of climate financing. The $100 billion that was done in 2009, and up to date, we can't be able to significantly be able to pinpoint where that money has gone to. So what the summit provided for is an opportunity for the Africa to have a common voice, so that as we move to COP28, we can be able to negotiate or to be at the table in terms of providing solutions. in this case, after this, as we work out the nitty-gritties of the declarations, we had to negotiate through with various African states to be able to agree together. From here, we head to the UNST conference convened by the United Nations Assembly in New York in the next 10 days. Then from there, we head to COP28 as a united voice. So that's one of the greatest achievements we've never, for the last 27 COPs. See, we are going to COP28. So the reason why, personally, I'm excited is because at least for the first time, we have African leaders coming together to declare that we are going to handle climate issues, climate crisis, climate emergencies as a united. And there were quite a number of things in that declaration. The declaration will be coming out in the next few days, fully when it is translated to our various languages. Of course, you know, we were co-hosting the summit as Kenya and the AU. This was not a Kenyan summit, it was an AU summit. That is why the African leaders were here. So the Nairobi African Leaders Declaration on climate action and climate finance was a critical thing that we were looking for, and we did achieve what we wanted.
I don't know whether, Bebe, you feel the same. Is there anything that inspired you about this declaration? Something that you'd either describe as a hit, or are there misses all over?
Yeah, I think,
where you sit.
Yeah, thanks for your question. I think there's a significant number of misses. I mean, the only hit is the fact that, you know, renewable energy is part of the language and one of the foundations of the declaration. But my previous speaker mentioned around the representation of African leaders. We had, I think, 20 present out of 55 countries in Africa. That is not even the majority representation of African leaders. So I think it's rather a short-sighted, you know, aspiration to then conclude to say that we are going to COP28 with a united African voice when we had less than 50% of the African leaders present.
But considering we've not done this before, is it not?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said earlier on, we've never done this before. So it's absolutely fantastic that we convened this space, but it's a missed opportunity. Now, if we look at the manner to which, number one, McKinsey, you know, international, a global north country, actually then constructed the agenda of the summit ahead of everything else. This was done outside consultation with fellow African leaders, which would probably explain why we have under 50% representation. The second aspect is that we gathered upon an African climate summit to discuss climate issues. CSO organizations, we are not actually involved in the process. There wasn't a consultative process to understand how this may be concluded, because at the end of the day, we are the frontline movement who actually speak and spend time with the people who've been affected by the crisis, meaning that we can effect certain policies that can actually benefit the larger continent movement of Africans. And essentially, this was not done. When we're looking at the Nairobi Declaration ahead of COP28, look, we only reiterated what we already know already as a continent, and we all agree on that the global north owes us a climate debt, but we need to call upon that in a much more assertive manner. You know, the 100 billion from 2009 is something that's not new. Last year at COP27, African leaders did particularly the same thing. So we cannot celebrate something that's already been reiterated and also been projected as a unified voice already in Africa. We have language around coal within the declaration coming out, which is absolutely great. But what about oil? That has actually then caused a lot of people in Uganda at the ECO project to be displaced. What about gas that has left, you know, people in coastal communities across Senegal, you know, food insecure as a result of deteriorating marine ecosystems? There is no authentic approach as to how we want to tackle this in a mindful way where we put people at the center. We've got carbon credits, you know, being mentioned. We cannot be, you know, if we are saying we are for development and we want to do that in a pan-African way for African people in a democratic way where people are at the center and we are addressing the climate crisis, then we shouldn't be implementing policies like carbon credits where we are providing licenses for the polluters to continue polluting. We're actually trapping ourselves in a cycle constantly.
We will talk about carbon credits, and there was also the conversation about carbon tax and whether this is the direction that probably we should be going in later on. But you've said something that we've seen also during the summit, several people complaining about the lack of inclusion. And I just want to get it from you when you talk about, you know, lack of inclusion, lack of inclusivity. We were sidelined. What exactly does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely.
And what would it have meant for you to have been included?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the first thing is, you know, when you're convening a space, you have to consult as to how you want that program to be run? And what are the key issues that need to be raised? Now, that was not asked of CSOs who are in the climate justice space, first of all. Even if we look at the side events that were conducted, we have over 60% of those actually being given to countries in the global north. We're having a great and fantastic opportunity to define the narrative as Africans on African soil. Why would you then opt to 62% of the side events were global north affiliated organizations? Meaning under that, we have African countries, we've got civil society organizations that are predominantly African. That is not even the majority. And that is not inclusion. It's exclusionary, if anything, because the question is begged, whose agenda is then being driven? So at the end of the day, did we actually invite the global north to come to African soil to make decisions on behalf of Africa? That's, feeding on and perpetuating inequality all over again. So in case we didn't reinvent the wheel, we're just constantly trapped in a cycle where we fail to make decisions. And I believe what needed to come out of here was an assertive declaration from African leaders on real, authentic issues in a process that involved everyone above board, leaders, CSOs, and other relevant stakeholders.
Okay. PS, I want you to respond to that, because you said
yes.
that you played a very pivotal role in organizing this summit. And were concerns such as what Bebe is raising considered? What was done to ensure that every crucial voice needed to move this agenda forward was included?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Allow me first to respond to the issue of the participation. It is not true that it is only 20 heads of states participated. Yes, the ones that were physically present in Kenya were 20 heads of state, but we had 45 delegations out of the 49 countries in Africa who are within the AU. Other countries are under sanction. So in terms of representation, we had 43 ministers of environment and foreign affairs and other sectors and energy. And therefore, in terms of representation, in terms of countries participating and being part of the declaration under the AU, we did achieved what we wanted. So it is not that it is 20 heads of state versus the 49 that was supposed to be there. We had also, where the heads of states were not able to be there, we had vice presidents, around five or five of them, who were representing other countries, and we had also cabinet secretaries or ministers of environment who were sent as heads of delegations. And therefore, for us to achieve the Nairobi Declaration, we needed to have that numbers of African countries endorsing it, and it was endorsed in that respect.
What about the CSOs?
I just wanted to respond to the first issue of representation. So it is not only that it is a minority who endorsed, no, it is an African nation. And that's why we the chair of the AU, it was not, he said the president who was carrying the declaration, he is the chair of CAUS, yes. But we had also the chair of the AU, Musa Faki, working together with the chair of CAUS, Dr. William Samoei Ruto. So it was our own, and we had even the chair of AU, the president of Comoros, and all other heads of states. So it was an African leaders declaration, Nairobi Declaration. On the issue of inclusion of CSOs, allow me to put it this way, that in this summit we did our best to be able to be inclusive as much as we could. One is that we had the pre-summit, the youth pre-summit that happened between 1st to 3rd of September. That brought together the youth. If Elizabeth were here, you would be able to explain, and you were able to see that on the last day, that's on Wednesday, the youth presented their declaration to the heads of state, led by the president and the chair of AUC and the chair of AU. Secondly, we had CSOs participating. They had a pre-summit in Safari Park. So CSOs were fully represented and participated in the summit. And at the end of the summit on Wednesday afternoon, the CSOs presented their declaration or their wish list to the presidents. We had the indigenous people participating, I think, on 2nd or Sunday. Sunday was 3rd. And they presented their process, also declaration. We had other programs that were running aside. So in terms of inclusion, we did the best that we could as government to be more inclusive in this process. So if my brother here, Pepe, didn't feel included, I think that is part of the process. So we can, I could mention this, that we were as more inclusive as possible. That is why you had various CSOs participate, and they endorsed the declaration.
Okay, PS, I'll cut you short there, but they don't feel that way. That's the unfortunate bit. But we'll continue having this conversation in just a bit. Allow us to take a very short break right here on Daybreak. Do stay with us and continue engaging us on social media at Citizen TV Kenya, at Safin_Chieng. The hashtag is Daybreak. Do stay with us.